Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We are just going to give another 30 seconds or so for folks to arrive into the room, and then we will get started. But welcome. Okay, I think we're going to officially get started because we have 30 minutes and want to ensure we have plenty of time to hear from our guests today. So I will pause and let Jen just step in for a moment.
Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être là aujourd'hui. Nous sommes ravis de vous offrir le webinaire avec une interprétation en simultané. Donc, si vous souhaitez écouter et suivre la présentation en français, vous avez juste à amener votre curseur en bas d'écran, cliquer sur Interprétation, choisir French, et vous allez automatiquement l'entendre en simultané. Merci.
Thanks so much, Jen. So welcome everyone. My name is Andrea Dix. I am with the team at Community Foundations of Canada and delighted to be here with you again for a lightning talk. Today's lightning talk is on grant making and equity in an emergency. And I am coming to you live and in person from my home in Ottawa, which is on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So welcome to this conversation. A beautiful day here, and welcome to our guests, Kate, Bella, and Jess. When we put together our lightning talks, when we were thinking about the Emergency Community Support Fund, from its design to where we are today in it, we really have been grounded in the fact that this is unlike anything that we have ever done before. This is grant making in an urgent emergency situation. And that is unlike the work that we have been doing over the past almost 100 years through community foundations in Canada. And so when we acknowledge that, and when we put ourselves into the space of making decisions, of communicating, of thoughtfully rolling out the Emergency Community Support Fund, we wanted to bring in some experts who do this every day, who every day are grant making in the space of crisis, who are grant making in the space of urgent community need. And so we were quite fortunate to have very talented women who are on this conversation join us. And I am actually going to turn it straight over to Jess Tomlin with the Equality Fund and allow her to introduce our other speakers and get us going. Jess, over to you.
Greetings. Thank you, Andrea, for that introduction. Bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde. I am Jess Tomlin. I'm the co-CEO of the Equality Fund, which is a fund that the Community Foundation movement has been such a significant part of as we try to lift it up and drive significant resources into the hands of women's organizations in Canada and around the world. This is an honor to be here, Andrea, to continue to foster collaboration across the gender equality movement and the Community Foundation movement. And when Andrea reached out to say that the Community Foundation movement was doing this work around moving money swiftly into the hands of community groups, there's really no better person that I could put her in touch with than the Bella and Kate from the Urgent Action Fund, who are actually in the business of moving money swiftly and safely into the hands of human rights activists around the world. That is what they do day in, day out, and they're a world-class leading example in how you fund and support the community activists who are really driving change. So I'd like to just take an opportunity to welcome Bella Baderdene and Kate Kruger to the conversation, both of whom work at the Urgent Action Fund. And what they offer is really, I think, and what's useful perhaps for today's call is both the ideological framework as to why sometimes you need to move money swiftly, which is something I'm sure you're all experiencing right now, as well as like what are the tactical and practical ways in which that can be done. And so I will turn over to my wonderful colleagues in the women's funding ecosystem at Urgent Action Fund and help us get through some of these, I think, questions that you're all probably curious about. But also just want to thank CFC and what, I have a crush on all the work that you're doing, but also that all the network is doing, because it amazes me how you continue to be so inquisitive and curious and listening. And this is just the lightning talks, and today listening in to the work of Urgent Action Fund is yet another example of you walking the talk as you try to learn and grow in these spaces. So thank you for that. So perhaps Kate, we will start with you. Kate, you should all know, is a Canadian who has not been here for a many number of years, but she refuses to return home, which is fine. As a dear friend of mine, I miss her, but she's in New York today as the executive director of the Urgent Action Fund, which is part of a network of many other Urgent Action Funds. And I'm going to turn it to you, Kate, just to tell us a little bit more about what the Urgent Action Fund is.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Jess. It's not quite true that I refuse to come home. These days are a little more difficult, but I do come home to Ottawa as much as possible, of course, just to visit you, if nothing else. Yeah, as Jess said, Urgent Action Fund is an organization that is dedicated to rapid response grant making. We're one of 4 Urgent Action Funds. There's one in Africa, one in Latin America and the Caribbean, one in Asia and the Pacific, and then there's the one that Bella and I work at, and they are all equal and independent, but work in consortium with one another. And what we do is fill this niche of making rapid response grants to feminist movements around the world. The rapid response model that we have is one in which we respond to all requests for funding within about 48 hours, and we move the money within a week of a request. So for us, rapid is rapid. It is ambitious, and the entire organization, as Bella will tell you later, is really designed with that immediacy in mind. Our grants are small, right? So when you're moving money very quickly, it's probably best not to be moving $500,000 at a time. So the maximum size of our grants is $8,000. Many of them are much smaller than that. They support 2 kinds of things traditionally. COVID aside, this pandemic, this moment of need aside, generally they fall into 2 categories. One is advocacy and the other is security. So on the advocacy side, feminist movements may have a very long arc of strategic engagement, but there can be these critical moments when an infusion of cash can help activists either catalyze gains that they didn't anticipate being able to make in terms of a women's rights agenda, or they can prevent a retrenchment of rights. On the security side, the other half of our grants are security grants. And those grants are really to serve women in the moment of need when their advocacy puts them in jeopardy in some way. So women, when they do this work, are often threatened because of the work that they're doing, because of the agenda that they are trying to advance, but also just fundamentally because of who they are, because they're women doing this work. And so our premise is that they need rapid funding for those needs as well. And that's why Urgent Action Fund was founded.
Thanks, Kate. So we're in an incredible moment in time right now, as there's just emergency upon emergency, and I would say urgency upon urgency, whether that's in the racial justice movement or elsewhere. I think one example perhaps that you can draw on is COVID and what that's meant for your grant making. And if you could perhaps share a little bit about what the UAF response has been for COVID.
Sure, absolutely. You know, like everybody, I think everybody except epidemiologists and public health experts, COVID really took us by surprise. It really was not on our bingo card for this year. Even though we're in the business of the unexpected, this, you know, was of a whole different order of magnitude. So we had to pivot quite quickly. We did have the mechanics in place, which was definitely an asset in this moment, but we pivoted, I would say, starting in mid-March, and between mid-March and now, we've made just over 100 grants, 100 rapid response grants for COVID-related needs. And as I said, we do advocacy and security. You know, that's our bailiwick. And yet in this moment, we've really actually had to stretch our mandate. And so while it's generally not been our approach, we've found ourselves getting request after request after request to meet very basic needs as both the health and economic crisis hit. So requests for funding for shelter, for food, for hygiene packets, for public health information about the spread of the disease. And as this was happening, what we saw institutionally was something that's been very clear to many of us, I think, individually. And that's that there are a lot of communities that live right on the edge, right on the edge. And these communities are generally living on the edge because of structural racism, because of systemic neglect, and because of that, they've been underserved by their governments, whether it's federal or municipal, by financial institutions, by educational systems, and so much more. So it's not a surprise that they've been disproportionately impacted by COVID, but it certainly has stood in stark relief recently. And so with that in mind, we started addressing needs of communities that have been underserved. And that's included things like the Navajo Nation in the United States, which had one of the highest rates of COVID and yet one of the lowest rates of government response. The Roma community in Serbia, which is generally criminalized when it is visible at all. Women with disabilities everywhere have had trouble accessing services in this moment. Incarcerated women, prisons where the disease has spread fastest, have also not received the protections that they need. So these are some of the immediate needs that we found ourselves supporting, even through the mechanics and the sort of equity lens of Urgent Action Fund's ongoing grant making.
Thanks, Kate. That's really helpful, and it's clearly, I mean, what COVID has done, I think, for all of us as funders in the human rights space is just really surface the inequalities and put them into very pointed gaze. And I think we're all trying to make that moment count and have it really create the shift that's required, I think, to move beyond it. And I'm wondering if, I think what's probably really relevant for this call, and certainly probably top of mind for many of the foundations on the call, is the equity and how that's been built into a rapid response grant making methodology. How did you? I'd be interested to know how you started that for Urgent Action Fund and how that factors into your decision making. Because it is a very different approach. I think it'd be great to hear a little more about that.
Absolutely, and Bella is actually one of the people who makes the decisions on the grants, so she can talk about this in certain practical terms in a moment. What I will say is that it's been a journey for Urgent Action Fund. Urgent Action Fund was founded in 1997. I've been with the organization 7.5 years, but it's been around 23 years, I guess, now. And when it was founded to support women, right? Just women, that was it. And in 2003, I think it was, the organization, Urgent Action Fund, received a grant request from a transgender activist in Honduras. And that was a moment for the organization because they said to themselves at the time, receiving this request, don't transgender people also experience discrimination by virtue of their gender in the same way that women do? And if that is the case, why would transgender people be excluded from a women's fund, right? So that was the first time that UAF had to expand its definition of who it served in its grants. And then gradually over time, the organization continued on this path of learning and stretching and expanding, and also looking at particular intersections. One moment of learning for us came after I became executive director just a couple of years ago, actually. So we were approached by a private foundation that wanted to support us to look at the intersection of disability, justice, and gender. And we received this grant to make rapid response grants to women and trans people with disabilities. And I'm embarrassed to say that I thought that would be pretty straightforward, right? That we had been waiting for the money. The money was finally here. And with that, the grants would essentially make themselves. And I remember in that first year of the grant, 6 months passed, 9 months passed, and we still weren't getting really any applications from women with disabilities. And when it came time to report on the first year of the grant, we kind of had to go to our funder and say, we're a little behind on our spending, which is not something that I as an executive director like to ever say. But fortunately, the funder was very understanding. She herself is a woman with disabilities, and she sort of said, right, so this doesn't do itself. This is something that you have to engage with proactively. So we did. We asked ourselves some pretty hard questions. Do we have staff with disabilities? Do we have advisors with disabilities? Is our website accessible to people with disabilities? Do we represent women with disabilities in our communications materials so that they can see themselves in our work? Do we ourselves have training on disability justice? And we kind of went through this list, and it's like, no, a little bit, not really, sort of, we'd like to. And that, initiated a pretty rapid process of learning for us about what we needed to do. So we got training, both staff and board. We reached out to new advisors from within the disability community. Actually, if you go to the next slide, you'll see, perfect timing, we featured women with disabilities in our communications. So there's one example, our Courage card, featuring, I think it's a Russian or Ukrainian, I shouldn't mix those two up, a Ukrainian group, a Russian group of women with disabilities. And we updated our website so that it has some accessibility features. So all of a sudden, doing all of those things, making that effort and kind of making those shifts internally as well as in terms of our external presentation, we started getting funding requests. And then when we started getting funding requests, we started funding more and more groups, and they taught us more and more about what we needed to be doing. And it sort of initiated a virtuous cycle for us. And that's been our most recent equity learning journey. And I'm sure it will continue, and there'll be many others to come.
Thanks, Kate, and really appreciate the example, like the tangible, what you actually had to do as an organization from multiple different aspects in order to be visible to those communities. Bella, I think what's really interesting for many folks on this call is the nuts and bolts around it. You're a manager on the grants team, and it's just your responsibility to ensure that outreach is there, that support and collaboration with grantees, that the responsiveness is there, but also that the rigor and the transparency and all that needs to be involved in the process is catered for. And so I think it's really, really helpful to have you on the call. And I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit more about the process for how UAF makes grants, and building on what Kate started to talk about, how we build equity and accountability, even within the context of rapid grants, which is, I'm sure, top of mind for many on the call.
Yeah, thank you. Do you mind going to the next slide? It shows our roadmap to how we do our grant making. I like to think that equity is well baked in our grant making from the start. So I'll start with our programs team. We are a team of 6, all women of color. Most of us have been either community organizers and or activists in our previous lives. So we're from the movement that we support. We accept applications 24/7, 365 days a year. We accept applications through multiple ways, such as secure site, email, over the phone, to ensure that we really have the flexibility to work with organizations with all levels of capacity. So we prioritize organizations that have an annual budget of 1 million and under to make sure that we're resourcing underserved communities and are supporting diverse movements. We also don't require our organizations to be officially registered. So we will accept trusted fiscal agent, whether be it fiscal sponsor or individual recipient, to receive the funds on their behalf and disperse it to them. And one of the unique ways that we pay special attention to organizations' leadership makeup is that we, if the request is to support a specific community or an issue, we make sure that the impacted communities are represented in some decision-making roles. Of course, as a feminist grant maker, our grants criteria requires that our partners be led by women and or trans folks. So moving on to actually reviewing the application, first we rely on our program officer's knowledge of the specific issue. And second, we rely on our expertise of our advisory network. So advisors are activists from the ground that are intimately aware of the issues and can provide honest input based on their areas of expertise. So they're well vetted and aware of our rep response grant making model so that they're really able to prioritize and respond to us in like a timely manner. Our due diligence process requires that we have 2 positive endorsements from advisors and the group's references. So once we have enough positive endorsements and our program officers have done the due diligence process, the final approval is up to our senior director or executive director. So after the grant is approved, we try to make the documentation process less burdensome and flexible as possible, because it's really important to be mindful of each organization's capacity. And it's important to work with our partners to receive the signed documents in the ways that works best for them. And after the grant is approved and documents are signed and the funds are sent, we require a short final report on the project. So our final reports are very short, 2 pages, 12 questions asking if our grant was helpful and if there's any other additional ways we can support their work in the future. So all in all, the grant making process takes maximum 10 days, and we hear back from our grantee partners anywhere from 3 to 6 months, depending on the type of grant that was awarded. And that really closes out the grant. And you can see the processes on the maps.
Amazing, Bella, thanks. Is there a way you can provide us? I'm sure that you have countless, given in particular the volume that you've just got through, to have activated over 100 grants in the last several weeks is really an amazing feat. And thank you for doing what you're doing. It's no one else really is, so it's extraordinary, and we're really watching what UAF is doing with amazement. Can you give us a couple of examples, like in real time within the team, of these kinds of grants?
Yeah, absolutely. I can share 2 recent grant examples, maybe one in Canada and one in the US. So in Canada, within last month, we made a grant to Indigenous matriarch-led organization that was organizing around land defense in opposition to a large-scale pipeline that was proposed to go through their territory. Their ask was really intersectional because the women defenders felt threatened by the man camps that were being created to construct the pipeline. So studies have shown that foreign man camps near Indigenous communities dramatically increased the rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And also, the defenders were coping with the spread of 19 without being able to leave their resistant camp. So our grant supported their well-being efforts during the COVID-19 time as well. And this grant really hit multiple intersecting issues, right? So we're talking about Indigenous rights, climate justice, gender justice, sexual and physical violence awareness, environmental justice, and safety and security activists. And this is very typical for most of the grants that we make. In the US context, we supported a peaceful solidarity rally for Ahmaud Arbery, an unarmed young Black man who was murdered by white men while he was on a jog. So our partner is a Black woman-led volunteer group that demands justice and to hold law enforcement, city officials, and those who were involved in the shooting to be held accountable. And our funds covered the group's transportation, hotel, food, and peaceful protest costs. And also, which is unique to us, is that we provided financial support to victim's mother to cover the legal fees and funeral costs. And it's really good to mention that we received this request within 2 to 3 days of the release of the shooting video. So our program officer's already existing relationship with the impacted community was really timely when the community needed someone to turn to. And we were able to respond quickly and move resources to the ground really fast. And I'm happy to provide more examples, but I'm happy to answer some questions as well.
Amazing, that's great. We have one question that I'll try to get to in the chat, and I know we're actually doing very well for time, which is, I don't know who put me in charge of time, but that was a terrible idea. Anyone who knows me well. But Bella and Kate, one of the things that's come up in the chat box is how do you help to ensure that smaller organizations can access funds and that the larger organizations don't monopolize the application process? One of the things, Emma, that we do or we're building for as we design the Equality Fund is actually a portfolio approach where we're actually ensuring a carve out is for small organizations under a certain revenue threshold. And it sounds like Urgent Action Fund does similar things, but Kate or Bella, would you like to say a little more about that?
Yeah, I can start, and then maybe if I miss something,
Great.
Kate can jump in. Yeah, as you mentioned, Jess, we prioritize organizations that are 1 million and under, and they're woman-led, and we don't require organizations to be registered. So that really kind of opens up the space for newly emerging women-led organizations to come and apply. And we also, of course, prioritize the grantee partners that we haven't made grants to before. So that means we're diversifying the support that we provide to movements.
Great. Bella, thanks, Bella. Kate, did you want to add something, or can I put this second question in and you can maybe tackle both? Another question from Lori is, how do you vet the organizations if you don't have a relationship with them? Which I know you have a very strong and well thought out answer for. So I'll perhaps
I do.
Turn it over to you. Yeah.
Sure, sounds good. And I'm sorry if I think my mic was disturbing some of you on my headset, so I apologize for that. The way in which we vet organizations we don't have a relationship with is through our advisors. So I think Bella mentioned this as part of our grant making process, but we have among the sister funds, the 4 urgent action funds, about 500 advisors, and they span the globe, but we have advisors in every country and community where we make grants. And so when a request comes into us, first of all, our advisors are often the ones who help us with the outreach in the first place, right? So from their position within the community or adjacent to the movement or understanding the local context, they will do outreach at a critical moment and let people know that Urgent Action Fund can be a resource for them. And then when we do get requests, we ask 2 separate advisors. Often, the ideal is not to have 2 people who are sitting right next to each other who share exactly the same perspective or opinion to comment on the grant request, whether it's strategic, whether it is coming at the right moment, whether this organization has credibility in the community, whether the request is legitimate, basically. And those endorsements also come to us very quickly. Our advisors know as a rapid response funder that we rely on them to get back to us within about 48 hours so that we can continue down that pipeline Bella outlined quite quickly. And then when we do that and we get 2 positive endorsements, and only if we get 2 positive endorsements do we make the grant.
Great. That's so great. Thank you. I think there's so much to take from here. We obviously can't capture it all in a lightning talk, but really just very happy to have the wisdom of Bella and Kate and the openness of CFC. I know Urgent Action Fund, as many women's funds do, this just embodying this central value, which is that we're funding organizations led by the people who represent the community. that we're trying, that are most deeply impacted, and that the involvement of people with lived experience in actual decision making and advising roles can really have a profound impact on the success of your grant making. So thank you to you both. Really appreciate that. And you know, I know Kate, I don't know you as well, Bella, but I know Kate's always open to additional questions and discussions and dialogue, and you probably are too. So I'm sure that's an offering I can kind of make on behalf of the three of us for the Community Foundation space.
Absolutely. Our emails are on the website. So just go to urgentactionfund.org, look us up in the staff list and send us emails anytime. And just so thrilled to be able to join you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. Nice to be on home turf, even virtually.
Yeah. Andrea, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jess and Kate and Bella. Thank you for spending time with us and sharing your experience. The examples have been tremendous. I know this will be really beneficial to Community Foundation volunteers and leaders as they navigate not only the Emergency Community Support Fund, but you've offered wonderful advice and tips for ongoing grant making suggestions. So thank you for that. For folks who are tuning in from community foundations, a quick reminder that we have another lightning talk today. It's like double Friday fun. And so we will be reconvening at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time for a lightning talk with individuals who are leading organizations that are supporting migrant workers. So really encourage you to participate in that. And I think that wraps it up. Again, big thanks to Bella and Kate and to Jess for joining us from so many wonderful places around the world. Thank you, and we look forward to staying in touch. Take care. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at 2:30.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you.
High fives. That was good.